Thank you so much for joining our podcast. This is really like a crossover podcast that I never thought would even make sense. But, as two Orthodox Jewish guys interviewing a mentalist, you were probably wondering when you got this email, like, what is this all about? It sounds very gimmicky, but actually, it's very important to us. Me specifically, actually, I've been a fan of James Randi, which we'll get into later on. But this is kind of like my dream interview because these are issues that actually in many ways plague our community. And I'm gonna, we'll probably get into it over the course of, and when I say community, I mean like, the Jewish people throughout the world. There are a lot of people who are unfortunately pulled into, I guess, the whole trap of the clairvoyance and the charlatans. When people are desperate, they get into that trap. So we're also going to get into that. But first, I actually want our audience to know a little bit about what you do. And you're a well-known mentalist. So can you explain the differences between mentalists, magicians, and clairvoyants? And can you tell us what area you specialize in?
Well, I've definitely been involved with 2 out of the 3. The difference between a mentalist and a magician is a mentalist doesn't come out on stage and pull a rabbit out of a hat or do rope tricks or things like that. He or she puts on a persona as if they have paranormal powers. They can move objects with their mind. They can predict the future, all the things that psychics say they do, but they never actually do. So a psychic or a clairvoyant, in my opinion, again, these are all my opinions, is a performer just like the other 2, only their performance involves manipulation, verbal deception, suggestion, all the things that go right to the edge of where a good mentalist will go, but crosses the line when they say they can see the future or talk to the dead or anything like that. So that's really the dividing line right there. So magic got me started when I was 11 years old. And then I slowly got more and more involved with the mentalist side of it because I thought it was a little more believable. I think people want to believe that you could move an object with your mind. Excuse me. Whereas if you just do a card trick, it's like, oh, that's clever. I could learn that too. So I wanted to have things that were inherently unlearnable, but use techniques of magic nonetheless. So I'm using techniques of magic, but I'm not presenting myself as a magician. So, and also another main difference is when a mentalist does a good show in an arena or a proscenium, he presents himself as a character who can do these sort of miracles, whereas a psychic is only using generally the in-person event to cull customers. In other words, they'll do readings and then they'll say, if you have a problem and you'd like to schedule a reading, see my girl at the back. And then they sign up and the medium or psychic gets a hook in that person, sometimes for life. So the show doesn't end with a clairvoyant at the end of the show. With a mentalist, the show is pretty much over and people accept it because it's in a proscenium, it's a clear performance. So those waters have been muddied.
Interesting. Now, I always wondered this, but is there like, you decided at 11 years old, I want to get into magic, and then you want to get into to become a mentalist. Is there like a school for that? Is there like a place you can learn? Because I feel like there's so many secrets in your world that you don't want to give away, your magic tricks and not other or your mentalism tricks. And at the same time, you also don't want, like right now, you probably don't want a lot of, phonies and, dishonest people to learn these tricks as well. So how did you find that path?
Well, I was very lucky to have very, very good teachers, including my first teacher, who was my grandfather, who was a magician. He did other things as well. He was a gambler and, different things, but he was pretty good with cards. And so from the age of around 6 or 7, when I started to understand that, what being fooled or what magic was about, I was his guinea pig. So he would practice his sleight of hand on me. So of course, this had a tremendous effect in my, whenever my parents would drop me off for grandpa to babysit me, he had this little cigar box that was full of magic tricks. And we'd immediately go to that and we'd start playing with these things. So it just inculcated this interest of the unknown, the paranormal, the bizarre. I didn't even know what those things were, but magic seemed to encapsulate this kind of fantasy world, and I just took to it and stayed with it. And my parents supported my endeavors in magic up to a certain point, and it just took off from there. So I never looked back.
Interesting. And did your grandfather tell you from the beginning, hey, you should know all this stuff is not real?
No, not at all. I think that
Really?
because again, when you're at 5 or 6 years old, you don't know the difference between what's real and unreal anyway. So he would just go ahead and do it. And then later, as I got maybe 7 or 8 years old or 9, when I started to question physical reality, which, you start to become kind of a wise guy, and then I'd catch him and then he'd show me. And then I realized that it was all a trick. But at a certain point, it was just magic. It existed and I didn't question it. But then when you get a certain age, you start to question things, and it spills over into magic and sleight of hand and all those things. I learned that when you see something in this hand, you shouldn't be looking there. You should be looking over here at the other hand. That's the basic thing, It's just don't listen, pay attention to the other hand, and you'll usually be able to figure out any problem, really. So.
Very interesting. And did you, when you first found out that magic wasn't, let's say, real, was that disheartening, or were you actually
No, not at all. No, and that's the thing is today, I think that's something that's very important for people to understand is all magic is science. And science is much more interesting than fooling people. So when I started to understand the science that was going on, I appreciated it on that level. I was never let down by it. I never felt like, oh, that's all it is. I was more like, wow, that's even cooler. But now I see how it's done, and I see how easy people can be fooled or fool themselves. So that's what kept me moving forward, is to try and stay on this level where I was one step ahead of the spectator or the sitter or whatever you want to call them.
Wow, fascinating.
All right. So for the second question, Homo sapiens have been around for thousands of years, and there's still zero evidence to the existence of magic. Yet the same charlatan tactics are alive and well. In the 21st century, this would seem to be an opportune time for clairvoyants to prove their alleged supernatural abilities. That fact alone is evidence that magic doesn't exist. But in your estimation, do you think some of these people are sincere and believe their own BS?
Oh yeah, there's a certain segment of people out there. I kind of use, if you can imagine a pie chart, and again, this is in my experience only, and maybe other people may have other opinions, but you're asking for mine. So in my 35 to 40 years of investigations, I would say that 95% of the people who I have investigated or worked with are complete charlatans, and they know it. And they're making money hand over fist because they're playing a role. It's a performance with them. Now, the other 5% on this pie chart, you break it down into 2.5 and 2.5. 2.5% are people who really believe they have some sort of power. But when you look really closely at it and you interview them and you test them, you usually find that they have some sort of mental problem. They could be schizophrenic. They could be, schizophrenics hear voices. If they're off their meds, they imagine things, they hear things. They say they can hear people thinking about them. There's a little crossover zone there between what is the exterior that they're experiencing and what is interior. And usually, well, all the time we find that it's an interior problem. They are creating for themselves, so they believe in it, and they really have a strong belief. You cannot challenge it because it's hardwired into their brain. So that's 2.5%. The other 2.5% are genuinely intuitive, highly intuitive individuals who are compassionate and kind and really want to help other people and don't necessarily attach any supernatural aspect to what they're doing. They're just really worldly, and they seem to know information only because they've worked with human nature for a long, long time. Gotcha. So it seems to be paranormal to the average person on the street, but really they're just really wise little old ladies or whatever who worked with people in the circus or the carnival or whatever, So yeah, the 2.5% is very powerful, but you have to remember 2.5 balanced against 97.5 are not good odds. As long as you proceed with that in mind. Yes. Whereas if you find somebody who you can talk to and they're warm and compassionate and they're not trying to steal your money or your car or your jewelry, I don't see any harm in it. That's why I entitled my book Psychic Blues, because the blues part of it is 95% of the people who you're going to be dealing with want to get at your life savings. And once they get a hook in, they will not let go. They will ride it as hard as they can. What's that?
That's the red flag.
There's many red flags.
One of red flags.
I think what I try and train people to do is use your own intuition. Intuition is knowing something but not knowing how or why. Is it supernatural? No. Can you develop it? Absolutely. Listen to your gut level. If your gut level says this person's a crook, listen to it. Problem is most people want to go to someone else, whereas if they listen to their own intuition, 99% of the time they're right. And if they don't listen to their intuition and they go against it, you got problems.
It's interesting that you brought up that they could have the other 2.5% have like some type of psychological problems. I think also like other religions, like let's say, for example, in Christianity, there's exorcisms that up until, and there are some within some pockets of Jewish beliefs. I think that we've been influenced in that.
Very big in Poland, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So like that's obviously they're either scamming people or like someone's having like some type of epileptic seizure.
That's right.
And then they're just like spilling like holy water on them to try to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
now we have, like you mentioned, science. We have the actual explanations for it, and we should be treating it this way. So I think that was an amazing point that you made.